International uproar over Donald Trump's plans for the future of the Gaza Strip. The U.S. president saying he wants America to take over the besieged enclave and make it, quote, a Riviera of the Middle East.
The U.S. will take over the Gaza Strip, and we will do a job with it, too. We'll own it and be responsible for dismantling all of the dangerous unexploded bombs and other weapons on the site, level the site and get rid of the destroyed buildings, level it out, create an economic development that will supply unlimited numbers of jobs and housing for the people of the area.
Speaking after meeting with the Israeli Prime Minister at the White House, Mr. Trump also repeating his call for a permanent movement of Palestinians out of Gaza and into neighbouring countries, running counter to long-standing position in Washington for a two-state solution. But Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli PM, welcoming this new proposal.
I think it's worth paying attention to this. We're talking about it. He's exploring it with his people, with his staff. I think it's something that could change history, and it's worthwhile really pursuing this avenue.
But a very different reaction from Hamas that has strongly condemned Mr. Trump's proposal as ridiculous and absurd, warning it could destabilize the region, a sentiment echoed by Palestinians in Gaza.
دعوة التهجير هذه ليست وليدة اليوم. مخططات كثيرة تناولت هذا الموضوع وفشلت. وبالتأكيد مخطط الرئيس الأمريكي دونالد ترامب سيفشل لأن الغزي متمسك بأرضه، متمسك بوطنه، بترابه وطني. وكثير من الحروب جاءت على فلسطين وغزة بالتحديد ولم تثني الشعب الفلسطيني عن الهجرة أو السفر إلى الدول الأخرى، فالشعب صامد وباقي لآخر نفس في هذه الحياة.
And not just traditional adversaries, US allies have also rejected this proposal. The UK, France and Australia maintaining their commitment to finding a two-state solution, while China condemned what it called the forced transfer of Palestinians.
中方始终认为，8人制8是加沙战后治理的基本原则。我们反对针对加沙民众的强制迁移。 希望有关各方以加沙停火和战后治理为契机，推动巴勒斯坦问题重回以两国方案为基础政治解决的正确轨道，实现中东的持久和平。
And for more on this proposal from Donald Trump, Giles Gibson joins us live from Tel Aviv alongside Nick Harper from Washington, D.C. Let's get to Giles first. Giles, we've heard the Israeli Prime Minister welcoming this plan from President Trump. But other countries in the Middle East, how have they reacted to Mr. Trump's remarks?
Well, here in Israel itself, not surprisingly, the far right of the political spectrum are fully behind this vision of Donald Trump for the Gaza Strip. The far-right politician Itamar Ben-Gvir, of course, until very recently part of Benjamin Netanyahu's governing coalition, saying that this is the only solution to what he calls the Gaza problem. It's not just the far-right, though. You also have the opposition leader, Benny Gantz, coming out and calling this creative, original thinking. But as you indicated in your introduction there, countries from across the region, Turkey, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, all of them coming out really to condemn this plan, really saying that they do not want to see any Palestinians displaced from within the Gaza Strip. Just to focus for a second on Saudi Arabia itself, they also said in their statement, the government, that there will be no establishment of diplomatic relations between Saudi Arabia and Israel without a pathway to a Palestinian state. That tone in that statement really contradicting what we heard in the press conference in Washington with Benjamin Netanyahu and Donald Trump, both of them sounding very positive about the prospect of a deal between Saudi Arabia and Israel.
Let's bring in Nick Harper in Washington, D.C. You heard Giles there, very positive, but positivity alone is not enough to fill in the detail. Mr. Trump, and I quote him, saying, the U.S. will take over the Gaza Strip and we will do a job with it too. Do we have any idea how he plans to execute on this plan?
Well, way soon, no, we don't. It's not clear. I mean, that is the extent of the plan so far, those very brief comments by Donald Trump, although he did suggest that US troops could potentially be deployed to the region to help out, despite himself saying many times over multiple years that US troops should not be in the Middle East. Whatever happens, though, if this plan were to be put in action, it would be an enormous job. The United Nations estimates it would take about 21 years to clear the rubble alone from Gaza. There's about 50 million tons of it there. They say that it would cost about $1.2 billion. Reaction here in Washington has also been mixed. Plenty of skepticism from lawmakers. The White House last night put out an email showing plenty of support for the president's plan, comments from some Republican lawmakers, but the vast majority of Republicans have remained silent so far. Democrats, though, being much clearer in their criticism, coming out, some of them saying that the plan is crazy, others saying it is simply dangerous.
Nick, there are questions, of course, how effective international law is in stopping individual countries from doing as they will. But for what it's worth, does this plan, at this point, in its current shape, violate international law?
Well, in its simplest form, Donald Trump is proposing the forced removal and relocation of Palestinians. And under international law, that is strictly prohibited. It even opens up Donald Trump potentially to the suggestion of ethnic cleansing of Palestinians. If you look at the UN Geneva Convention that lays out humanitarian law in conflict, it prohibits the forced movement of civilians. It says that it's only possible if the security of the civilians involved or imperative military reasons so demand. So international law being very clear on this. And then there's the issue of the two-state solution, something that the United Nations and the United States has for decades been backing. It is long-held Washington foreign policy. What Donald Trump is proposing, of course, seems to very much go against that idea of having Israelis and Palestinians living side by side.
All right, this brings Giles back. And Giles, in Tel Aviv, we're currently about 2.5 weeks into phase one of that very fragile ceasefire in Gaza. Talks should have started on what should happen in a much more difficult second phase. Does this development, this plan from Donald Trump, substantially affect talks on the future of that ceasefire in Gaza?
Well, this bombshell announcement from Donald Trump does come at a really critical time as the two sides negotiate whether to move on from phase one to phase two. Just to remind you that phase two, the kind of central parts of it are that all Israeli hostages would be released by Hamas, and in exchange, all Israeli troops would withdraw from the Gaza Strip. Now, we have heard from a senior Hamas official in the wake of Donald Trump's comments at the White House saying that we are committed to ensuring the success of the negotiation in the second phase. So Hamas showing clear signs that they still want to continue with the negotiations. Before that press conference in Washington, we did also hear from the Prime Minister's office here in Israel that they are planning to send a high-level delegation to Qatar at some point this week to continue the negotiations over moving on to phase two. I think really behind the scenes, a lot of people involved in these negotiations, the mediators as well, will be asking themselves the question, how serious is Donald Trump about this proposal? Is he willing to jeopardize some of his other aims, such as establishing that normalization of relations between Saudi Arabia and Israel in order to move forward with this vision that he's set forth for the Gaza Strip?
Oh, thanks. Nick Harper in Washington, D.C. and Giles Gibson in Tel Aviv looking at this dramatic U-turn, at least apparent U-turn, on Washington policy on the Middle East.